Well, thank you very much. We're really happy to be back for the third year to talk about what we're seeing at the legislature. And this year is so weird. I mean, I think you all would know that just by watching the television or picking up a newspaper. But for folks who are at the Capitol, it's one of the strangest sessions I've ever seen. And it's really slowed down in some ways, a lot of the proceedings, so that there's not as much substantive work that's already been happening, but it's going to happen really fast now that the Minnesota House is back in session and committees are meeting. So we're really experiencing this week a huge uptick in the activity level at the legislature, and we expect that to continue through the end of session. Before I get started, just one bottom line issue is they got to pass a budget by June 30th or else this government shuts down. So that is the main business of this legislative session and will become more and more important as the session winds on. I'm here with Carly Griffith, our water program director, who is a partner with me at the Capitol and works a lot on our water issues and is an expert on a lot of stuff. She's also newly minted Dr. Carly Griffith. She won't tell you that, but I will. I think I need to share my screen here. Let me make sure that I can do that. It should work. Can everyone see the screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's see here. Turn it over to Carly, talk a little bit about who MCEA is.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's really good to be here again with you. As Erin said, I'm Carly. I am the Water Program Director at MCEA, and we just had our 50th birthday party this past fall. So we are a nonprofit law firm and advocacy organization. We've been around for 50 years, and what we really focus on is, in particular, the law. We have a lot of attorneys on staff, and also the best available science to protect both the health of Minnesotans and the environment that they rely on. We have 28 employees, mostly in our St. Paul office, but we also have an office up in Duluth, Minnesota. And we have 4 program areas. So we have expertise on water issues, climate and energy issues. We have a Northeastern Minnesota program up at that Duluth office, which focuses mostly on mining issues, but deals with a lot of water issues as well that are Great Lakes focused. And then our newest program is a Healthy Communities program, which is more focused on issues in urban areas and with a particular environmental justice lens. And we're known as a legal organization because of our large number of attorneys on staff, but we are unique in that we work at all 3 branches of government at the state level. So we lobby at the Capitol. That work is led by Erin. We work directly with agencies. We do comments on administrative rules and permits. And we also go to court when we need to hold decision makers accountable to the law and the science. So next slide. So who we are, this is our contact information. So feel free to reach out to us after our presentation today if you have further questions about anything that we've discussed. We've really valued the partnership with you all. And I, in particular on the salt issues that it sounds like you're already very well organized around for this session.
So I sort of previewed this a little bit in my pre-talk, but the legislative landscape is really strange in 2025, and you toss in all the disruption of what's happening in Washington, D.C. on top of it, and it gets even more disorienting. There's been a lot of chaos, but things are starting to coalesce recently in the last week or two, and things are starting to normalize a little bit, at least in St. Paul. So there is an agreement between the House Republicans and House Democrats on how to organize the House. There's a 67 to 66 temporary House majority for the House GOP, and they are now in control of the speakership. So Speaker Demuth was elected as part of the process of organizing the House. There is a special election in the Roseville area, House District 40B, that is scheduled for March 11th. It's very likely that will result in a tie, which is a very unusual situation in the House. But given all of the controversy and difficulty in organizing the House, they're pretty much prepared for that, and it should be pretty straightforward once we get to March. But between now and mid-March, House GOP controls the committees, and they are moving forward very quickly with hearings this week. In the Minnesota Senate, there's a 34-33 majority. I say a new one because Senator Carly Griffith passed away in December, necessitating a special election in her district. Senator Doran Clark was seated last week, and that is reestablished the 34-33 majority in the Senate for the DFL. As I mentioned at the top, this is a budget year, and so everything needs to, by June 30th, there needs to be a budget or the government will shut down. And so that will be the driving force for this legislative session. Many of the legislative water proposals, therefore, will sort of kind of ride along with the budget or die. It's kind of a ride or die situation on this one. There's usually not very many standalone issues. However, a lot of the water programming and a lot of the water budgeting work is through the legacy fund. And that budget item is a separate item from the rest of the committee budgets. I'd also say, and this is me just guessing here, but I think a bonding bill looks pretty unlikely. It's possible, and certainly Governor Walz has proposed one. His $887 million package really focused on a lot of water infrastructure and climate mitigation projects, but it would require a 3/5 supermajority of both bodies, so you would need both Republican and Democratic votes to pass a bonding bill. And so really stay tuned on that one, but I think that the bonding bill is going to be difficult to pass given how much acrimony there is at the Capitol this year.
All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back in on this one. So I'm just going to give a preview here of some of the topics that Aaron and I will cover in more detail. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. I'm glad that someone mentioned the proposed elimination of the pollinator account and the repeal of the Lawns to Legumes program, because that just popped onto the radar recently, and that's not in our list here today, but definitely another important one for the work that you all do. But some of the topics that we'll touch on today: salt applicator best practices and liability reduction, which I know you're very aware of and involved in. Nitrate pollution and private well water protection, PFAS source reduction and biosolids, which is a big new topic in the PFAS world. Public waters definitions and changes to our statewide public waters inventory. Governor Walz's budget proposals, which include the Clean Water Fund proposals, data center water usage and electricity usage, and uncertainty in federal funding for IRA and IIJA appropriations. And we will leave time for questions at the end and are happy to talk to the extent that we have any expertise on other, legislative issues that you want to talk about.
So as you know, and I've noticed in the first bullet, this is the 8th year of attempting to pass a liability bill around salt application. As you are well aware, a lot of the salt application is done through government units who actually, I think, you're doing a pretty decent job of starting to think differently about application, whether it's substituting with brines or trying to find other ways to limit the amount of chloride application. I mean, I serve on the City of Fridley's Planning Commission and Environmental Commission, and I'm really pleased to work with my city staff on this stuff. The real problem is there's not a lot of tools to deal with private applicators who present about a third of the problem based on what we know. And this bill attempts to incentivize folks to participate in the smart salting trainings by MPCA by saying that if you do that and you're certified, you get a reduction in liability. If you follow the rules and apply salt safely but sparingly, if there's a slip and fall injury on your property and you can show that you were certified and that you were following the standards, then you are not liable in the same way. If you know anything about slip and fall liability, you know that this is an extremely fraught area caught between the insurance industry, building owners, applicators, and that's part of the reason why it's been so complicated, because the scope of the liability reduction has really been the sticking point trapped between the insurance industry, the trial lawyers, and the building owners. And there is another attempt this year to pass a bill. This has been filed in the Senate as SF 492. The primary author is Eric Putnam, who is a St. Cloud Democrat and the chair of the Agriculture Committee. There are no hearings scheduled yet, and we're still waiting to see how things happen in the House. Because the House hadn't met officially, all of the bills that were filed have to be refiled, and so there'll be several slides today where it's like got a Senate file number but no House file number, and that's the reason why. So when this comes up for a hearing, I know that you all are active on this. Let your legislators in your service area know you want this bill to pass. If you want to join a sign-on letter, we'll be organizing one, or we'll be working with somebody who will organize one. The watershed districts and organizations' participation in this in the past has been really influential at the legislature. I don't know if Abby Moore is on the call, but Abby's been a real champion for us at MWMO on this in the past, and has helped organize testimony as well. So if this bill is heard, we would encourage you to testify for it. I know that it's kind of crazy to say this is the 8th year, but we're going to make another push. But that's the way things work at the legislature sometimes. I will say that even without this applicator liability bill, there are significant appropriations in the Clean Water Fund budget proposals that address chloride use. This is definitely an issue that's starting to get traction. The governor issued a proclamation on the Salt Awareness Week, January 27th through January 31st. I know that Purgatory Creek's been really active on this issue. So I will say that even if that seems like nothing is happening on this, there is progress being made, and it's in large measure due to the work that you all have been doing. So thank you for that. And I'll kick this next one over to Carly.
Just quickly, Erin, did you see the question in the chat?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Are there any changes in the liability bill language between last session and this one?
Yes, there is one change, and I think it's going to be the sticking point, and it's about the liability standard. Basically, the conflict at the legislature over the last couple of sessions that I've been around for is about whether or not you should exempt businesses up to what is called a gross liability standard. In other words, you really screwed up. Like, you didn't just forget to do something. You kind of aggressively, I'm paraphrasing here because I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not an expert on liability standards, but basically this would mean that only the most egregious failures on the part of a salt applicator or a business owner or property owner would be subject to liability. The other standard is just whether or not you are negligent, right? So negligence can be not an aggressive or conscious thing, but just you forgot to do something. And the current bill text, I believe, includes that they would be exempted up to gross negligence, which the trial lawyers, Minnesota Association of Justice, and others will oppose. But this has gone back and forth over the years. It's been amended to be gross or regular negligence standard. I expect that will be the centerpiece of whatever discussions happen this session as well.
All right, so I will jump in here on nitrate well contamination responses. So this builds on the petition that MCEA and 10 other organizations, local, regional, and national organizations filed with the EPA in April of 2023, which did lead to a directive from the EPA for Minnesota state agencies to take further action to protect public health in southeastern Minnesota from nitrate contamination, especially in private wells, which don't have the same protections as public water systems. So there's sort of two prongs of that work. One is long-term source reduction, which is going to be a long-term project, going to take a lot of coordination between different agencies. And the other is more immediate public health relief for people whose water is unsafe to drink now, with an emphasis on the most vulnerable population, so homes with pregnant individuals or infants, and also people who demonstrate income-based need for assistance. So there is a bill that's been introduced that MCEA worked on, Senate File 1183. The chief author is Gustafson, but it's a long roster of Senate authors. It is bipartisan at this point. There's bipartisan support for the bill, and it's a focus on It continues an appropriation that was made last session for this immediate public health relief. There are two changes. So the appropriation last session was for 2.8 million. This ups the appropriation to 3.866 million each year of the next biennium, which aligns with what the Minnesota Department of Health estimated the need was in southeastern Minnesota. And it also expands the eligible services. It was previously just reverse osmosis home treatment last session. This expands the eligible services to include well repair and well reconstruction. And the reason that that's important is there's a good number of wells in southeastern Minnesota that were constructed before the Minnesota Well Code was put in place in 1974 and aren't up to today's construction standards. So for wells like that, well repair or reconstruction is more effective in the long term to address the problem than just RO home, tap treatment at the tap through reverse osmosis. There's also 3 million for each year of the next biennium from the Clean Water Fund for public-private well education and outreach. Also to work on a well inventory. So basically to find and inventory those pre-code wells that aren't covered in our current state inventory. So those are the big appropriations right now to continue the public health response in southeastern Minnesota. I will note this bill, Senate File 1183, is focused on nitrates. However, there are 5 contaminants of concern that the Department of Health prioritizes and recommends that private well owners treat for. And those include not just nitrates, but also arsenic, manganese, lead, and coliform bacteria. So we are also really interested for a more comprehensive private well mitigation program in Minnesota that would include all 5 of those contaminants. And so we've started to, discuss that idea both with the Department of Health and with the Health and Human Services Committee at the legislature to try to see if we can get traction for a more comprehensive program that looks at all of those top 5 contaminants. On the long-term source reduction side of this issue, there was a Minnesota Environmental Rights Act lawsuit filed in January that MCEA is the lead on, but that Minnesota Well Owners Organization and Minnesota Trout Unlimited are also plaintiffs. And what that really does is it asks the agencies to review our state rules for feedlots and commercial fertilizer management to see if they're adequate to protect vulnerable groundwater areas in the state or if they need to be strengthened through a rulemaking process. And then finally, in January, the Pollution Control Agency finalized a new feedlot permit for the largest feedlots in the state that does include some common sense measures to better protect groundwater resources from nitrogen pollution in particular. So we were supportive of that new feedlot permit. Okay, PFAS, that's on the news all the time and on everyone's mind. Forever Chemicals, Minnesota is the home of 3M. So, really feel a unique responsibility to be a leader on this issue. So Amara's law was passed in 2023, and we are, a leader nationwide with Amara's law in really comprehensive source reduction. So, the big dilemma is PFAS is persistent in the environment for a reason. It has the strongest organic bond found in chemistry that's very hard to break down in the environment, which means it's incredibly expensive to clean up once it gets into our waters and our soils. So one of the most cost-effective things that we can do for the long term is effective source reduction. Basically, turn off the tap on PFAS production in consumer products on the front end, push our industries to innovate and find safer alternatives to PFAS for the products that they are used in, with a focus on non-essential uses of PFAS. So there are some industry uses of PFAS in particular. I think of things like medical devices that have been determined to be essential uses of PFAS, but then there's many other uses that have been deemed non-essential. So right now, Amara's Law is in implementation. It began to be implemented in on January 1st of this year. And so what we're now engaged in at the Capitol is a lot of defensive work. There have been some efforts to pass exemptions for Amara's Law for certain product categories, things like juvenile products, certain types of, internal hardware versus, does the ban apply to internal hardware within products? So there's a lot of discussion at the Capitol of, do we need to write in exemptions to the law? And we've really pushed that rather than, write in exemptions on the front end, we should let the rulemaking process that's being led by the Pollution Control Agency to determine what is an essential versus a non-essential use run its course. That process has slowly begun, the rulemaking process, and MCEA is and will continue to be involved in rulemaking. And I see in the chat here, yes, I've been really impressed by Dakota County's leadership on the PFAS issue, in particular around biosolids, actually, which is the next topic that I want to touch on here. And it's really kind of the next frontier of the PFAS issue here in Minnesota. So biosolids are a byproduct of wastewater treatment. They are a nutrient-rich, semi-solid mixture of, human waste that comes out of wastewater treatment, but is very nutrient-rich and has been can be used as for bulk land application as a fertilizer on crop fields or for site reclamation for other uses, and has been found to be a significant source of PFAS contamination in a lot of other states across the country. We released a report on PFAS in wastewater in November of 2023 and have wanted the state to take on this issue. Currently, we don't even test biosolids for PFAS levels before they're land applied on cropland. But finally, we had a legislative directive last session to the PCA to develop a biosolid strategy. They put out a draft strategy in the fall that we commented on. They finalized that strategy in, I believe, last month, January 2025. And basically what it does, it's largely modeled on the Michigan approach to biosolids as opposed to the Maine approach. The Maine was an all-out ban on the land application of biosolids and has had some unintended consequences because we don't have good alternatives for how to get rid of biosolids, in particular, how to destroy the PFAS. So the Michigan approach that Minnesota has adopted is more of a risk management approach. Number one, it's about data collection. So we actually test biosolids for 40 PFAS compounds before they're land applied. And the results of those tests are given to the landowner who land applies the biosolids. And it's also given to the Pollution Control Agency. And then there's thresholds with different levels of action. So if you're at a low level of biosolids, there's limited additional a low level of PFAS in the biosolids, there's limited additional steps you have to take. Moderate level, you need to limit the cumulative application rate to cropland, and you need to, the wastewater treatment plant needs to do upstream source reduction. So a lot of the most significant sources of PFAS in wastewater are from industrial dischargers that use PFAS in their manufacturing process. So this actually, if you're in that moderate category, you have to do that upstream source reduction with your large industrial users, which is a really important, it's been successful in Michigan to achieve significant reductions in two of the most well-studied compounds, PFOS and PFOA. So we're happy to see that risk management approach here in Minnesota. We're happy to finally see data collection on PFAS levels in biosolids. I would add that one further step that we think is really important that isn't currently in Minnesota's strategy is soil and shallow groundwater investigations in sensitive areas of the state, parts of the state where soil and geology is more sensitive to groundwater contamination. And we have really good information on what areas of the state are the most vulnerable. And we think that we need to start to investigate soil and shallow groundwater because we've applied biosolids to cropland for decades. And we've only just started to better understand the risks of PFAS and biosolids. And as we've learned from other states, there can be really serious contamination from legacy biosolids application. We think we need to start to begin those investigations to see where the highest levels of risk are and what kind of remediation support farmers might need to remediate their land if there is this legacy contamination. And then really quickly, we have been commenting extensively on a very complex wastewater permit for the 3M Cottage Grove plant that discharges directly into the Mississippi River. PCA has proposed a draft permit that would be the first industrial wastewater permit in the state with strict PFAS limits. And appropriately, it would be on 3M, the originator of these forever chemicals. So we expect that to be finalized in the next month or two. And I will stop my long rant about PFAS.
I know that we probably talked about this last year, but there's a public waters definition in law that was the subject of a Supreme Court decision a few years back that MCEA was involved in, involving a drainage project in Renville County on a appropriately named a body of water called Limbo Creek, which was actually literally in limbo between whether it was a public water or not. And the 2024 legislature both modified the definition of public waters to address that issue, and then also appropriated $8 million over 8 years to revise the public waters inventory using current technology, satellite data, LIDAR, et cetera. Ironically, so I serve on that for the Environmental Quality Commission, and we literally were talking about public waters last night. And this issue comes up because things like shoreland overlay districts and other forms of zoning requirements that cities do frequently are tied to the status of a waterway, whether it's on the public waters inventory or as is defined as a public water or not. So we're excited about this process. The DNR hasn't kicked it off quite yet. They're about to announce their procedure. Their plan is to use those $8 million over 8 years and kind of divide the state into 8 chunks and do it one chunk at a time. We don't know what the chunks will be or when they will start, and that's what we're waiting to hear from the DNR. It could be alphabetical. I live in Anoka County. I would like that to happen. Or it might be regional, which I think probably makes more sense, to be honest, considering that many of these waterways cross county boundaries and therefore be more efficient to do it in chunks like that, geographic chunks. There are several bills that have been introduced to either pause this process or allow counties to basically veto any changes to the PWI that MCEA is opposing. None of these bills have received a hearing yet. I think it's probably unlikely that they proceed, but our goal is to defend that win from last session, and we intend to do so. But I know that it's one of the things that I've learned by being on the City of Ridley Commission is that public waters definitions matter in metro and urban areas too. And they really do have an influence over development decisions, zoning, et cetera. So I look forward to seeing whether or not this relook at the public waters list, which was first done in the early 1980s using basically aerial photography, can be updated to make sure that all waterways that drain more than 2 square miles, which is the definition for a stream or a creek that qualifies as public water, are included under the statutory definition and also in the public waters inventory. I'm not going to read this entire slide. I'd be happy to send you a more comprehensive summary of this, but the governor's budget proposal includes a whole bunch of stuff related to water. Many of these are not in the general fund. You might have seen news about the general fund being pretty tight or that there's a deficit coming. Many of these are funded out of the Clean Water Fund, which comes from the Legacy Fund, the additional sales tax paid on funds and is devoted and earmarked for projects to improve water quality, among other things, including arts and stuff like that. So I've put a few here on the list that I think are interesting to this group. I will highlight the chloride reduction a proposal, which would put $1.3 million towards salting management and grants to local governments. I think a number of your organizations and districts are probably very well aware of the importance of this fund for the work that you do. I will say that, we're able to provide additional information about the specifics if you're interested, but this is the selection that I pulled out of that list. Is there anything else you want to add here, Carly?
No, this looks good to me. I mean, there's also a lot, there's several PFAS infrastructure requests as well as the only one I'd add.
Okay. The largest item is the last item, just so you might be aware of it, the watershed-based implementation funding. This is the largest chunk of Clean Water Fund. The governor's proposed an increase from 78 million to 90 million for these implementation grants, and many of these go to different local units of government and SWCDs and other organizations across the state.
I will try to be quick here. I'll say I think that I saw Kristen from Freshwater on the call here. I know Freshwater has a lot of expertise in the area of data centers and groundwater sustainability. There was a really excellent webinar that Carrie Jennings was a part of a month or two ago on this topic. But there's a lot of interest in data centers, right? There's a wave of data center proposals in the state, and there's concerns about a variety of impacts, the grid impacts, the energy grid impacts, and the potential to threaten the electrification commitments that we've made within the state, the decarbonization commitments. Because of the massive energy use that these data centers demand. There's also a lot of concerns about water. These facilities require massive amounts of water, usually from groundwater appropriations to cool their servers and other equipment, and also indirectly water that's used to generate the massive amounts of electricity that they use. And we have started to think about legislative ideas to regulate or recognize some of these impacts in different sectors, from climate to water to local community impacts. And we do anticipate that it will be a big discussion at the Capitol this session. There's already been a couple of bills proposed, and we expect more to come. So I think our role will be to ensure that the discussion doesn't focus just on one piece of the impacts, just on climate or just on, local zoning, and that it incorporates all of these impacts. From my perspective, I really want water to be a big part of the discussion. So, Aaron, do you want to expand on House File 28?
Yeah, that's being heard tomorrow. In fact, after I get off this call, I need to go up to the Capitol and file our written testimony on that. And basically, I'm calling that the Diesel Generator Protection Act of 2025. Because it would exempt diesel generators that are being used by these centers. And if you're following the news at all, these are absolutely massive. For the Becker data center that Amazon is proposing, there are 250 diesel generators. And you might think to yourself, what's the big deal? They're an emergency backup. They'll probably never run. But to run an emergency backup generator means you have to test it all the time. And so neighbors and people who live nearby these sites would be subjected to overnight tests of these diesel generators every month, probably more frequently than that. It also expands the use of a loophole for what they call alternative urban area-wide reviews, which you may be familiar with in some of your work. This branch of environmental review is really designed to allow cities and other local units of government to create development plans that might have multiple phases when they're doing development planning, for example, adding a new subdivision or subdivisions to previously undeveloped land. But what's happening these days is a lot of the proposals for data centers are going through this process in secrecy. So there's no name attached to it. It's just described as a development proposal, and you find out after it's approved, who proposed it and who's actually going to build there. So there's a lot of issues around data centers involving water, energy use, materials usage, and ways in which they're trying to skirt public disclosure and public discussion and engagement around these proposals. And there's been some pretty good news coverage of this recently, and we're looking forward to taking this discussion further at the Capitol this year. There's certainly a lot of interest in looking at Minnesota's sales tax credit. It was passed in 2011 at the time, those data centers were much, much smaller. Now we're talking about hyperscale AI-driven data centers that are 100 times the size of what we were providing a sales tax credit for in 2011. That sales tax credit, by the way, includes a sales tax credit on all the electricity that they use. And the Farmington data center proposal would use as much electricity as the entire city of Minneapolis would on a daily basis. So we're talking about an incredible amount of energy here. One last little tidbit, and we're going to be doing a data center that webinar as well on February 28th. So we'll send that information as a follow-up to this group. I saw a question in the chat about whether there's a recording of that other webinar. I don't know, and we'll look into that. And if there is, we'll put a link to that in the email we follow up with as well.
Yeah,
I put in the freshwater link to it.
Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. Lastly, I don't know what to say about this, except there's a lot of uncertainty because no one really knows what's happening. This is literally changing minute to minute at this point in terms of court orders and injunctions against the spending freezes that have been imposed, whether or not Congress needs to weigh in and will weigh in on repealing some of the incentives for under the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Jobs and Infrastructure Act. One of the big question marks has to do with lead service line replacement. We're still waiting to see how much of that money has been encumbered or sent on to local units of government to do that work versus what still remains with the federal government. I don't want to leave things with like the impact is unclear, but we don't know yet. And we're still following this. And like I said, if you're following the news, you know that this is literally changing hour to hour right now in terms of what courts are weighing in on what issues and what pots of federal money. But it's certainly a topic around of conversation around the legislature right now. And I know the agencies that are involved and have contracts with or projects with the federal government are all wondering what the impact of this will be. We don't know yet. We are still working on building out our website for this legislative session because of how weird it's been. We do have a wonderful website, though, under How We Win, Shaping Policy. It's basically where a lot of the information about the legislative session lives. So if you're inclined to look for our testimony, our fact sheets, or other information about legislation at the 2025 legislature, it is not there today, but it will be very soon. So please do feel free to use our website as a resource. We will be updating and putting up our bill tracker. We've been waiting to get the House files added before we do that. So we expect to do that later this week or early next week in the latest. And we do track a whole variety of environmentally focused or environmentally relevant bills, including a lot that will impact water work. I mentioned the data center webinar that we're doing at noon on February 28th. I'll be doing that with our climate program director, Amelia Voss. She's going to be covering the climate and electricity demand issues, and I'm going to be covering the water and materials demand issues. So this is one of those issues that's really developed quickly. There's kind of a gold rush afoot, I should say, about trying to get as many of these projects in the ground as quickly as possible. And it's really, it's definitely a topic of interest and conversation among all parties at the Capitol right now. And also, many of you may be tracking the e-waste product stewardship work that's been happening over the last couple of years. And I'll be doing a webinar with Maria Jensen from Recycling Electronics for Climate Action. Formerly, she used to work for Repowered, about their efforts to pass a environmental product responsibility, an EPR bill for e-waste, which is similar to other bills on packaging, paint stewardship, carpet stewardship, and other things that have passed previously in the legislature. And so that is the end of our presentation. And thank you for your kind attention. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you've got. I've got a couple of requests for the additional information about the governor's budget in the chat. I will be sure to send those out after this call. But we'll be open to any other conversations you want to have. So open the floor to questions.
I'm curious if MCEA has been involved at all in the dispute between Castle Rock Township and the city of Farmington. The Farmington City Council and Castle Rock Township Board scheduled a special joint meeting. I think it was like a couple weeks ago, but it only lasted 4 minutes, and the city gave a prepared statement saying that they were not going to engage. Um, I'll try and find a link to that, but I was just like, we're trying to find out, just keep finding out more about what these data centers have planned and like how do we get past these roadblocks just to getting information?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we've met with the Coalition for Responsible Data Center Development, which is the local Farmington
Hmm.
residential opponents. And from what I understand, Castle Rock Township has filed a lawsuit against the city of Farmington, arguing
Yeah.
that the development violates their agreement about why am I blanking on the name of this? But like when a city takes over a township area, incorporation,
Annexation.
yeah,
Yeah.
Annexation.
annexation. Thank you. And that's what I think the dispute is about. That what the 4 minute meeting is. But I would love to see that video. That's hilarious. I think that it's kind of a. I mean, obviously, annexation is a real issue, but it's kind of a sideshow to this, to the bigger questions about whether this is going to move forward. The city of Farmington completed an alternative urban area-wide review for this proposal and approved it, I think, back in December.
Hmm.
And so, I think there are two lawsuits currently in play, neither of which MCA is a party to be clear. One is filed against the city of Farmington by the local landowners, and the other one is filed by Castle Rock Township against the city of Farmington for violating their annexation agreement. And of course, in that particular area, as you would well know, given you're in Vermilion River, the intersection between groundwater and surface water
Hmm.
resources is not theoretical. There's already a
Hmm.
number of significant groundwater demands. And the AUAR for the Farmington proposal said that they would increase the amount of municipal appropriations from the city of Farmington by about double if it went forward. That on top of the additional appropriations from the Elko Newmarket proposal for Niagara bottling, that area is already suffering from a drawdown in the aquifer levels, and this would probably continue that process. So we have real concerns about the cumulative impact of a lot of these proposals in that particular area in the metro, as I'm sure you do too, Britta.
Yeah. 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 Then like the first time I heard about this, it was about a year ago, I think, because my supervisor was at a meeting for Castle Rock for a different topic. And the issue and the city, I think it was someone from the city, gave a presentation about this data center proposal, and it didn't say who the company is or anything else. And like they're the, they seem just very shady. And so I mean, they're trying to get it approved before they say how much they're actually going to impact.
Yeah.
But, and then like, the way that political winds are, it's hard to know what the watershed can even say about it. Because, we're governed by a board of county commissioners from Dakota and Scott counties. So depending who those folks are. But I just wanted to, oh, I didn't even know about the Shakopee one, Victoria.
Yeah, there are at least 10 that we're aware of that are these hyperscale proposals. The biggest ones that are the most advanced are in Becker and in Farmington. And there's actually like several, like there's one in Hampton. There's another one in the west area of Farmington that's not the one that we've already talking about. I mean, so there's just they're dotting the landscape. I doubt all of them come to fruition. Um, and the way this usually works, as you said, Britta, is that there's kind of secrecy about who's proposing it. And then even when they find out who's proposing it, it's usually a third party. In this case, it's a big company named Tract Development
Yep, yep.
that does it's kind of they're actually working on behalf of somebody else who you don't even know who that is, right? And
Yeah,
so there's levels of obscurity, right? Where members of the public who want to know what's happening, who's proposing what, can't even find that out. And then the AUAR process, I think, contributes to that.
And there's a lot of non-disclosure agreements that get put in place really early on between city or county staff and the company that proposes the development, which really impacts exactly that issue of what they can share with the community when the community rightly is concerned about the impacts of the proposed development. One other thing I wanted to mention on Farmington is the DNR administers water appropriation permits in Minnesota. And they have written and expressed their concerns about the lack of adequate information in the AUAR about the proposed groundwater appropriation. One of the sort of procedural issues that I'm interested to raise at the Capitol is the fact that water appropriation permits often waive the aquifer pump test requirement, which is designed to look at the impact of the proposed use on surface water resources connected to groundwater, on private and public water supplies in the area. And to give you an example, there's about 400 water appropriation permits issued by the DNR a year, and only two to six on average include an aquifer pump test. And in addition, there isn't a public comment period requirement with water appropriation permits like there are for many of the other types of permits that we have in Minnesota. So there's some procedural issues there too, where we could get more, we could use that piece of the process for these data centers to create more robust public engagement and more transparency, and require the aquifer pump test as a bare minimum.
Yeah, I think I recall with the Niagara plant, they did do a pump test.
Yeah.
The appropriation still passed anyway, but it was the same kind of deal with, like, it was the company didn't apply for their own permit. They had the city apply for a permit, appropriation permit increase so they could build there. And it always feels weird to me that there's such strong, like, public backlash against these sorts of things, but the, like, elected officials always just seem to vote unanimously in favor of them.
Yeah, and
There are
the
really
pattern.
strong incentives for like local units of government. I mean, the property tax revenues are really high. There aren't a lot of jobs created by these proposals, but it's almost irresistible, I think, to local units of government, school districts, et cetera, to be able to get this pot of money, So I think that's really what's driving a lot of this, is that there's a strong economic incentive for the development of these for tax base, especially in the communities that tend to be targeted, which are on the exurban fringe, which are really looking for those kinds of industrial developments.
And it creates a lot of perverse incentives for the municipalities to compete with each other to market their water resources and attract these water intensive industries rather than plan for sustainable groundwater use at an aquifer scale.
I'm sorry to do this, but I have to head to the Capitol in a couple of minutes. I'd be happy, Carly, if you're willing to sit around and take more questions, that'd be great. But I do need to go. And I wanted to, before I go, I just want to thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you for your partnership on these issues, and invite you to join us on the 28th and the 10th for our webinars. And we'll follow up with more information, including the list of projects that we saw in the governor's budget that's relevant to water work, in an email back to this group. So thank you so much for your interest in our work and our shared values. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
I can stay for a couple more minutes if there's other questions. And if not, I will just second Aaron's thank you for this forum and this space to talk about these shared concerns, and for us to learn from the work that you all are doing as well, and the concerns that you're seeing on the ground, for sure.
Thank you, Carly, for pulling this together in this weird time where, you didn't know what you'd have. And you gave a great presentation and really touched on some issues that all of us are working on. So thank you.
Thank you. Spaces like this are probably more important than ever with so much uncertainty out there. Well, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah. Thanks for putting your email in the chat. And also, if we want to would you say, like, joining the newsletter is probably the best way to stay afloat of what's happening?
Yeah, I would say that, and then checking that page on our website that Aaron flagged. So if you go to, I think it's How We Win and Shaping Policy, that's where we'll put the 2025 bill tracker. where we list bills that we support and oppose. And it's a pretty long list usually, and I think this will be no exception. Maybe more opposing than supporting this session, but that's one of the most active. That's where updates get posted the most frequently.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. My email's in the chat, and I would welcome more conversations. I'm really interested to learn more, especially at what's happening at the city and county level on issues like PFAS and groundwater sustainability. So would really welcome follow-up conversations with some of you on those topics.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
And I know Jess mentioned earlier, if you want to stick around for a few minutes, if you're interested in learning more about the Chloride Engagement Subcommittee, and what that will entail this year, we can stick around and chat about that for a few minutes, but we will have more opportunities for that in the future too. So if you have to head out, that's all right. But if you're interested, feel free to stick around a little bit longer.
You want to stick around. You do. Okay, this is my green light, Anne and Sophie, to go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm kind of coming into this assuming that y'all know what Winter Salt Week and Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota are. We've talked about them several times, so I want to kind of skip over that just for the sake of most people have heard it before. But if not, of course, that October 9th meeting would be, that recording would be a good place to get that information. And then I can also put the slides from that presentation in the chat. I'm going to share my screen. Do I have the ability to do that? Let's try it. Okay, I have this short agenda here. So I figured this would just help us stay on track and you guys can follow along here. So a little bit of background on these two campaigns. This is where you can find the recordings. So I'm going to skip over that part and just jump right into this Winter Salt Week 2025 debrief. So this was Wisconsin Saltwise is the regional lead. They've been doing a Winter Salt Week for several years. In 2024, some other states kind of got in the mix, and then in 2025 was the big Minnesota push. And so we're kind of doing this debrief of kind of like what we accomplished. And I think we're really proud of the reach. I've heard so many things about what people did and spun up really quickly, actually, for Winter Salt Week in 2025. I heard from Allison at Wisconsin Saltwise that they've seen over 900 registrants from over 30 states and over 2,500 views and counting as of last week for Winter Salt Week webinars. And Governor Walz also issued a proclamation recognizing Winter Salt Week. I think he did it on January 27th. So if you missed it, that's a big deal to have the governor do that proclamation. So we're really proud of that. I feel like there was a lot of grassroots kind of coalition building around Winter Salt Week. And so my request to you is if you have any feedback to pass on to those organizers. This was a big, they were trying to figure out like what's the best format. There were a couple like national scale speakers early in the week. There were public works perspectives on Wednesday. So there was Darren Ellingson from the city of Minnetonka represented Minnesota. And Thursday was a policy panel. And then Friday was like a local action day. So if you have any feedback to pass along to the organizers as they reflect and kind of say like what worked, what didn't work, I'd love to capture that in the next week. So if you could get that to me by February 19th, send me an email or give me a call so I can get all that information back to the debrief that's happening among all the participating states later this month. And then I'd also like to capture who did what. So I've heard things from here and there about different cities or counties or watershed groups that were doing actions related to Winter Salt Week. So if you did a proclamation, a resolution, any social media or an event or anything else, if you could send that in the chat or send me an email by February 19th, that'd be great. Any like photos, reels, press releases, anything that you produced would be awesome to get as we archive our inaugural Winter Salt Week effort in Minnesota. And now that we're under this Watershed Partners umbrella, this would be something that I think would be great to report annually on the outcomes of our chloride engagement work, to say, here's how many communities are on board and doing things related to Winter Salt Week, or this other Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota campaign. So please send me anything you have by next week. For Low Salt, No Salt, we're transitioning to Metro Watershed Partners in 2025. So we'll have a little bit of, the website will change as that gets hosted by Hamlin. Right now it's being hosted by Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District. And the reason that we're so excited that it's being embraced by Metro Watershed Partners is this program was established by this ad hoc Hennepin County Chloride Initiative with clean water funding. So that was always meant to be kind of a temporary group. And so they produced several things. One of those things was Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota that launched in January 2023. And so now we have Metro Watershed Partners to really amplify that program and that messaging, and then continually tweak and hone and refine that program as we deliver it metro-wide. And it was designed to be delivered statewide and to be kind of still something that watershed groups or cities or counties can kind of pull down to their community and refine and deliver locally. So we have an interactive map. Here's the website as it currently is. And so there's resources for Winter Salt Week we're on here, as well as Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota. And we have a map. You scroll down just a little ways here, there's a map of participating sites where the program has been implemented. If you're implementing Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota, please, you can fill out a form on the website to say where you've done it. The data is essentially just the address of the place where that consultation occurred and the year that you did that work. And then we can update this interactive map. We do it about quarterly, update it to capture where that work has happened, partly to show where you could get some support from another community that's already implementing this program, and to be accountable to the clean water funding that was used to build this program. And then some of the goals for 2025 initially here is to recruit people for this subcommittee. So I would love to hear from you if you are interested in serving on this subcommittee. And the other things that we want to do in 2025 is establish a community of practice for practitioners. So if you're implementing Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota, or you're kind of that chloride content expert for the group community that you represent, I think there's a lot we could learn from each other and collaborate and share. Everyone is doing this in a silo currently, and there's a lot of things that we can do to share, just like the Clean Water Minnesota campaign. The messages transfer across boundaries, so why wouldn't we just share and use the same thing? There seems like a lot of efficiency there. That's a pretty small lift, but I think, if we get 2 or 3 people that are like, yes, I'm really interested in that aspect of it, I think that'd be a really small lift. Establishing training opportunities for Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota. I think that's a medium lift. If we get 3 or 4 people to raise their hand for that, I think that we can decide what that looks like for training. But I've heard from some folks that they just need a little bit more confidence before they can take that program and really implement it locally. I think there are a lot of groups that are, a handful of groups that are implementing Low Salt, No Salt Minnesota. And so if we can get those groups together to talk and share and lessons learned, that would just help grow the program even more. I'd like to identify some leads for Winter Salt Week 2026. That is a super small lift, I would say. So if we get a few people that are interested in that, that's just coordinating with Wisconsin Saltwise, which is the regional lead. The PCA Metropolitan Council has recently said they're very interested in how they can get involved in chloride information. Of course, Metro Watershed Partners, people that are outside of the subcommittee, LGUs and NGOs. And then this subcommittee would continually evaluate the program materials. All of you that do outreach and engagement know that things need to be continually refined and updated and honed and kept current. And so it would be evaluating those materials, helping to identify needs, and helping to make a plan for adapting those materials as needed, and maybe reaching out for local support to do those things. Every community has different resources, and some might have the ability to support some graphic design, some might have the ability to support some video production, and then there's the MPCA that has grant funding. So I think there's definitely a lot of ways to keep these things current and moving, but we need more than I think the broader the group is, the more responsive the program can be to everybody's needs. So I'm hoping to get several people to chip in and get involved. That's what I have for this. I can share the October 9th slides in the chat, and I can share this document in the chat if you guys want to take a closer look at it. But maybe I'll pause here and see if there's any other conversation or questions or comments at this time.
Jess, could you drop your email in the chat?
Yep, I will do that right now.
Thanks.
And Jess, I'm going to say you are super organized. You make it sound really easy. So I'm hoping people jump in and we can keep this rolling. This is a great invitation. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Jess, if folks are interested in being part of the subcommittee, should they just email you directly and the organization can go from there? Would that be preferred?
I think that'd be a good way to start.
Okay.
And we are hoping to have time next month as well at our meeting to do breakouts for the subcommittee, so that so we're hoping to build in to the Watershed Partners meetings times that groups can get together, so that you know that we're not asking, there will still be some time outside maybe to do some of these things, but also wanting to make sure that we're providing opportunities for these groups to come together and coordinate. And yeah, this is a super helpful document. I actually had a question. Do you know if the Winter Salt Week has a breakdown by state as to how many people signed up for the different or registered for events?
They do. I don't have that number in my back pocket, but before Winter Salt Week started, kind of as an update as it was approaching, they're like, here's everybody who's registered. And you could see Minnesota was leading, by the way. We're exceptional in a lot of ways, including registrations for Winter Salt Week. So, and I think there was a lot of folks were ready to do their chloride messaging, even though Winter Salt Week kind of was announced late in the fall. I think there's some really impressive stuff that people spun up in like no time at all, open houses and like collaboration with the libraries that Carter mentioned. Some of those things that I think were pretty like, you're already tapping into these resources and partnerships that you already had. So I'd love to hear more of those stories so I could share those with everybody else and we can brag about how great Minnesota did. Also in like the local action day kind of list of things that were happening for monitoring and art. I know MWMO was really exceptional on the art piece. They were hosting something. They also had an artist in residence that had a show or an exhibition. So I think also in that inventory of like local action day things, Minnesota was also winning there too. So so yeah, I'd love to hear more about what people are doing or what ideas they have as well. I'll also say, as a city person, I'm not like a educator background by training, so I'm very excited to tap into this group as well, which I feel like has a lot of that expertise and creativity. So I think you have a lot to bring to cities and counties as well, and fellow watershed districts too by getting in the mix. And I realized that I don't know if this is just like an alphabetical thing. I direct message my email and put all these things to Anna B only. So I will try again to get it to everybody here, my contact information in these files.
Thank you.
And we'll push those out on the Metro Watershed Partners email list as well. But yeah, this is fantastic and very exciting Jess. I really appreciate your work on organizing all of this.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to work with all of you.
And Jess, it looks like the folks at Washington Conservation District shared some of their things from Winter Salt Week. Just to see
Perfect.
those. And then you said if other folks had feedback or events or outreach pushes they did, they can just email that to you as well.
Yep. And by February 19th would be the most helpful so that I can get all that information compiled for that bigger, kind of more regional debrief. And if anyone's interested in Winter Salt Week 2026 and wants to be included in this initial like debrief and planning for next year, I'd say it's a super small lift to do Winter Salt Week stuff. So if you're curious, have ideas, or interested, for sure, let me know and I'll loop you in.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other last questions or comments? Yeah, thank you so much, Jess, for your time on this. It's very exciting.
And very exciting to hear that Minnesota was winning at Salt Week.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for being here today and sticking around. And we will see you all at our March meeting, which will be virtual. And then in April, we'll be meeting in person. So stay tuned. We'll be posting on Mobilize what those events will entail, but we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.